Thank you everybody for waiting. Those that joined snap on 10 or just before. So it's really wonderful for everybody to have joined us today. I'm sorry it's a couple of minutes late. I was just waiting for a few more people to join. So anyway, welcome and thank you so much for joining our London Property Roundtable today. Our panel of experts are all geared up and raring to answer all of your questions. We're delighted with so many varied questions actually. And they're from people all around the world. And we'll work as hard as we can to answer as many as we can. But if we don't get round to answering every single question, then don't worry, we'll get back to you after the event, whether it's for me, for the tax person, the mortgage broker, everybody will get back to you. And plus there'll be a recording of the event, which will be sent to you shortly after, or maybe the following day, depending on the numbers that we get out. So before we kick off with the first question, I thought we'd let each panelist briefly introduce themselves. So I'll introduce each one and then they can just talk quick intro. So to start with, Simon Ward has joined us today. He's Director of SPF Private Clients. Simon, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you, Mark. Simon Ward from SPF Private Clients. I've been working for SPF for 22 years. And I'm based in the London office. And during that period, I have looked after clients buying and investing in property in the UK all over the world, from all over the world. So we have access to just about all of the banks in the market. That's from retail banks through to private banks. So I'm looking forward to being able to answer as many of your questions today as I can on the finance side. Thanks, Mark.
Hi, thank you very much, Simon. Welcome. Next up is Jonathan Neelan, who's a partner of Quastell's Legal Advisors. Jonathan, good morning.
Good morning, Mark. Thank you. Good day, everyone. I'm Jonathan Neelan from Quastell's. I head the residential conveyancing department, where we deal with all aspects of conveyancing. And for the last 20 years, we've dealt with a significant number of overseas clients investing in and relocating to the UK, building up particular expertise over those 20 years. I'm very much looking forward to answering all of your questions today.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much, Jonathan. Vida Mayer has joined us, who's one of my co-directors at Benham and Reeves. He's an accountant by trade and a tax consultant. So good morning, Vida. Would you like to do a little intro?
Morning, everyone. Hello, my name is Vida Mayer. And as Mark mentioned, I'm the finance director at Benham and Reeves and a chartered accountant by profession. And by the nature of my job, I'm involved in assisting our clients, not only with their accounts, but also with any tax queries that they may have. And tax seems to be quite a hot topic. So I'm looking forward to answering as many questions as I can today.
Brilliant. Thank you. There'll be lots as well, I'm sure. And then on to Anita Mehra, our managing director of Benham and Reeves, who's been in the property business for 150 years. So she's joined us, no, I'm joking. So she's joining us today to give her insight. Anita, do you want to do a little intro?
Thank you, Mark. As Mark said, Anita Mehra. I've been in the property business for 40 years, 4 decades. So have seen good and difficult times, although I've been at the helm of the business for the last 20 years as a managing director. We started with one office in Hampstead and with a passion for property and for the business. Today, we are 16 branches covering most of London and also have 2 more branches coming in the next couple of years. Internationally, we've also been established in Southeast Asia, China, India, and now in the Middle East. I don't just work at my business, but I'm also a passionate investor in London property and love to bring good results for ourselves, our families, our clients, and have seen that happen over a period of time. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Anita. Quite a lot of questions already coming in, and a couple of people have asked, are we going to have a recording of this? And we absolutely are, and we're going to send it to you tomorrow or this afternoon or tomorrow. Thank you. So over to Rob, who's head of lettings innovation at Rightmove. Rob, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi everyone. Morning, Mark. Yeah, it's great to be here. So I work for Rightmove. So that's the UK's property portal where many of you will be looking for properties or selling your properties. It's sort of the shop front window for many agents like Mark. And so I look after lettings for Rightmove, so looking at the whole of the lettings market and also new products, so how we can rent properties faster, how we can make more money for landlords, and how we can perhaps sort of make the whole process of letting a property easier and faster for both tenants and landlords as well. So that's what I do, and I'm excited to talk to all of you on the panel, and look forward to many of your questions.
Great, thank you very much, Rob. And as I said at the beginning, for anybody that doesn't know me, my name's Mark von Grunter. I'm a director of Benham and Reeves. I've been here for a long time now, a very long time now, and I look after letting, sales, a bit of everything really. And I'm happy to answer any question, but I'm going to really try to guide everybody through, so give everybody a chance to talk on everything. So on to the first question. Oh, and during the thing, please keep bringing your questions in. We did have quite a lot of questions before the event, so we're going to work our way through them. But if I spot anything burning coming up, then we'll try and answer that too. So let's kick off with a nice, easy question. If everybody can give one reason why London is still the world's capital city for property. Let's start with Simon, sorry.
So my reason is because of the financial centre that London has, and I have worked in both the City and Canary Wharf in the last 20 years and seen both areas grow significantly, and many of the major worldwide companies choose London as their base for their both European and world headquarters. Brilliant.
Anita?
Well, having been in the business for such a long time and seeing the consistency and the continuous growth of London property, together with the unprecedented rental demand, makes it a very interesting and exciting investment. So that's my reason.
Brilliant. Jonathan?
Well, Mark, from my personal experience at Costells, our immigration department's always been incredibly busy, particularly with student visas, which influences my view of seeing education as a really big driver behind rentals and purchases into London.
Brilliant, thank you. And Vida?
So from my field, I guess, other than London being a desirable place to be, what I think is an important factor is the fact that we have a clear and transparent tax system over here, making it easy for investors to understand exactly what they can expect from their property investment. Great.
And Rob?
So I subscribe to Samuel Johnson, who I think said, when you're tired of London, you're tired of life. And I live in London, so selfishly, I hope it's a wonderful place to invest over the next few years. But I really think that it's a global hub. And there are lots of people talking about how, you know, our current sort of pandemic travails might change the way we work. But my strong view is that London will remain a global city of commerce, and therefore it will always be a very attractive place for property, both living and investment.
Okay, my quick reason is profit, because I think everybody only invests in, I live in London like Rob too, and I'm a passionate Londoner. But I really think the reason it's the world's capital city for property is because it's the best place you can make money. You can buy property prices on average double every 10 years. And bearing that in mind, I think it's a great place to invest. It's a very solid, transparent, legally, and finance is on offer relatively easily. And there's tons of tenants, so it rents very well, and it's very liquid if you want to get out. Good, so thank you very much for that. So the next question is, what's the, Shelley Hugh asked, what's the outlook for London and nearby area market in the next 6 to 12 months? What's your advice to cash-ready buyers? Rob?
So the thing I suppose is worth talking about actually when it comes to over the next 6 to 12 months is the good news really is that we've seen rental demand really come back. So when we saw the lockdown, we saw a big dip in tenants, so obviously not looking and not inquiring about properties because they didn't know how they could move house and it was locked down. But actually we've seen a really big comeback of tenant demand. So I'm really quite enthused about how robust London is, and I think that's a really important thing because you need to be able to rent it to. If you're going to invest in London property, you need tenants to rent it to, and I think there's a really strong supply of tenants, which I'm really happy about actually. I was surprised how quickly it's come back, and it continues to come back, even increasing on year from last year actually, which is really good news for investors.
Brilliant, thank you. Anita, do you have a view on that, of what's the outlook and advice to cash-ready buyers?
Well, as Rob said, I 100% agree with him, and we are actually experiencing it. We've seen the tenants, prospective tenants, come back in the market. We are seeing the transactions happening almost. We are as busy as we were last year. Soon after the lockdown, people were able to view properties, and we're seeing the tenants signing up agreements for 2 or 3 years. So definitely the rental market is back on, and on the sales as well, we're seeing people coming back in the market, looking for, looking to invest. And yes, and if we look at the outlook, I think it's very strong. The Bank of England is not going to raise the interest rates. There is a huge rental demand, as Rob said, and we are actually experiencing it. And if we look at what Knight Frank are saying, they are predicting the prices to jump by 6% in 2021. So
that's interesting, actually. So thanks for that. I mean, a couple of other people are asking where properties are values are heading in the next 12 months. And someone asked, what's the predictions after Christmas? That's a good question. So are you saying you agree with Knight Frank's figure of 6% for next year?
Well, if the property prices are going to be flat for this year, which is pretty likely, and in fact, some people can get better deals because if they have cash ready. So for sure, and we're looking at the pent-up demand.
I agree. Rob, do you agree with that, where prices are going next year, and what are the predictions for after Christmas?
I find it hard to make predictions because I'm sometimes wrong, but I will. The only thing I will say is that stock, and this is not just now, this is over the last year, we've had a real lack of stock when it comes to rental properties. So I think that's a really important thing, because you've got lots and lots of tenants trying to rent properties. From a demographic point of view, you're going to have more people renting and renting for longer in this country. We're a small island with only a small amount of land, and London, isn't getting any bigger. And we've had a lack of stock, as I've said, for a number of years. So I think that sort of supply and demand is in your favour over. And I know, Mark, you talk a lot about the long-term time horizon. I think that's quite an important thing. The demographic trend is with you. If you buy well in the right location, I think you should have some really good returns, actually.
I agree. I mean, we as a business look at mid to long-term views, but Simon, do you have any views on cash-ready buyers, what they should do?
Yes, I do. Obviously, people who have cash are in a much stronger position than those who need finance. But I just wanted to mirror perhaps one of the comments that was said earlier about how the market's rebounded since the lockdown's been lifted. And I was talking to one of my contacts in one particular part of London over the last couple of days, and they'd had the busiest week last week that they've had for many, many years, with people looking to make the decisions sooner rather than later now that the lockdown's been lifted. But I think definitely people with cash are in a stronger position to negotiate deals. Sadly, it means from my point of view that I'm not needed, but obviously there are enough people out there who need finance.
Jonathan, do you have a view on that, where whether the outlook is? Have you seen anything from your clients saying anything on the outlook is?
Very difficult to look to the future, Mark. I would say London's prices are often influenced by international events around the world, and not surprisingly, we're seeing a lot of business coming out of Hong Kong at the moment. Yeah, I'd echo what Rob has said about lack of stock. So prices are holding up. I mean, I've seen a few people pay over asking recently because they found the property that they want, and there isn't a great deal of stock out there to choose from at the moment.
No, it's interesting. So, I mean, when I was hosting these kind of forums, Anita and I do a lot in Asia in 2018-19, the doom and gloom was actually all about Brexit then. Obviously, we look back to that and not being an issue. But that said, we know that our friend George Osborne, well, he's not my friend anyway, and he's certainly no landlord's friend, not anymore. He tried to pull the property market down. And then there's Mark Carney, Jean-Claude Juncker, Michel Barnier, and now coronavirus. Property in London, I think, has been attacked from more places than the Alamo, if I'm really honest. But what has the outcome been? The outcome being, despite these assaults on the UK property market, we've still seen, as everybody's reflected here, price buoyancy overall has prevailed. So here's the question, I think, for everybody is, given how bulletproof the market is here in London, over the last few months and years, do we really think that prices will fall further? A couple of people have asked that. So I think everybody's saying no, but does everybody want to go around? Anita, do you think prices will fall now or not?
I personally don't think the prices will fall. Simple economic principle of all times, demand versus supply. Yes, there will be some people who can get good discounts because there may be a poor investor who cannot complete for various reasons, or some developers who have got few stock units they want to sell. So yes, for people who have cash ready, who have money available, or the mortgage in place, will be able to pick up some deals. But other than that, I don't see properties prices falling down. We know that we are dealing with people, and when they start looking for massive discounts, they're not there because developers are confident.
I agree. Simon, do you think?
Well, no, I mean, I think this is very much a personal view rather than a professional view. I think it's important just to make that point. But given that the government has put a lot of incentives in place to enable the country to stay on its knees during the lockdown, should mean that there will be very few repossessions. And the fact that they've put interest rates at the lowest level they've ever been would suggest that they're trying to keep mortgages affordable people while they get through this period. So all of that would suggest that we're not going to see any downward price pressures. So yeah, I mean, my thoughts are very much that we will get through this very well, and all of the leading commentators are predicting price rises next year.
Okay, brilliant, thanks. Rob, do you have a view? I'm sure.
Yeah, I do. So I think one of the big problems that we have when we talk about property is that we talk about it in the macro. So I've just talked about big rental demand and all the rest of it in London. But what you've got to remember is property is local. So unless you're buying, 100 properties, then, it's hard to get the whole spread of what we're talking about from the macro market. So what is important is to buy well, to understand your local market, to buy the right property and to get the right advice from people who know that area, because otherwise all the stuff about the market is irrelevant to you. It's like if I bought Tesla 3 years ago, I would have made a tremendous amount of money. But if I bought the wrong stock, I would have made a lot less. You've got to buy the right property in the right place. So that's what I would focus on. I wouldn't focus about the market. I would focus on what property suits you for your investment, your time horizon.
100%. Jonathan, have you had anything from clients or your view on whether the prices might go down?
Well, whether prices come down, I expect will be governed by whether people find they have to sell. As Simon mentioned, the interest rates are low at the moment. We're not seeing forced sellers at the moment. The banks, I can't see being under pressure from, they'll be under pressure from the government not to foreclose on mortgages if people are finding difficulties. And the government's been providing a lot of support so far, encouraging mortgage holidays. So we're not seeing a lot of forced sales, and as Rob says, there's still that shortage of supply. Whether that changes or not, we just have to see.
Brilliant, thank you. Vida, have you got a view?
Yeah, I mean, just sort of echoing what everyone else has said, but from my perspective, the important thing to consider is that property is a long-term investment. It's not like stock which you buy and sell. Property tends to be an asset that you buy and hold. And just coming back to what others have said, what typically happens in London when you get into a crisis like we're experiencing at the moment, or issues such as Brexit, is that people just hold on to their investments. The market stays flat and we wait for things to return, and things start to pick up as they have done in the past. And we did some analysis recently looking at property prices for certain properties in our portfolio over the last 7-8 years, where we've had Brexit, we've had tax changes, we've had all sorts of things. And we found that, on average, most of the properties that we looked at had experienced excellent financial growth.
I think that's across the market. And I think that's the thing that we're, as I said earlier, my question, London is bulletproof. And I think, yes, there's ups and downs, but actually what we're really seeing is lack of transactions. And Simon and Jonathan, I'm sure, are seeing that, because that's what Corona's done, has caused a drop in transactions because people couldn't get valuers out. They couldn't move. So, but I think it's coming back. I'm reporting everywhere. Rightmove just had some figures out. about jump-in transactions. So I think that's good. This is an interesting question. This is actually for Vida. There have been quite a lot of tax questions, as you can appreciate. So Rachel Tan asks, foreign tax investors will be taxed on their capital gains after April 2015, which is 5 years ago now, which is amazing. Must we then get a valuation? Vida, do you want to quickly touch on that?
Yes, I mean, I think it's an interesting point because some people may not have been aware of this introduction of capital gains for overseas residents from April 2015. Previously, they were exempt. So given that they're going to have to pay tax from that date, it's important to understand what the base value of their property is to calculate future gains when they do sell. And the most common way of doing that is by getting a valuation from a surveyor as to the value at that date when the tax change came in. But there are other methods of doing it. You can take the original purchase price if that works in your favor, or you could take a straight line method where you take the gain from the date you purchased to the date you sold and you average it out to work out what the value was at April 15. We recommend getting the valuation done so you can pick and choose whichever works best for you.
That's great. Thank you very much on that. There are quite a few more tags, but I think this is a good question. Mr. Webster asked, has the panel of experts, see, you're all experts, seen a resurgence in property transactions, sales and rentals since UK relaxed COVID measures? I know we've kind of touched on this. Rob, I think you're the best to start, kick that off. Yeah,
so what we look at is really sales agreed. So we're definitely seeing quite a big jump in sales agreed since lockdown, and actually it's not very far down now in terms of actual sales agreed, which is the best metric, than it was last year. So that's what I mean when I say that the property market has come back faster than I think many would have expected, because we're seeing the sales, not just the sales that were sort of agreed and then had to stop, but actually new sales be agreed, both in London and the rest of the UK. So that's really positive sign that people are looking to transact and are actually more confident in the property market than many pundits, people like the BBC, would have led you to believe. So I think that there's good news on that front.
Brilliant. Simon, have you seen that?
Yeah, very much so. I think I mentioned earlier that I just through my personal network of contacts, they've all been telling me over the last couple of weeks that they've had a huge uplift in people registering, a lot of interest in people looking to move. I think one of the things that the lockdown has done is it's made a lot of people look at the lifestyle that they have and how they live. And one of the things that I think is going to become a lot more important for people is the space that they live in at home and the outdoor space that people have. It's going to be very much about people thinking about what lifestyle that they're going to want to have going forward. And I think one of the things the lockdown has done, particularly when you've had to work from home for the last 10, 11 weeks, is review your family and living arrangements generally. But absolutely, the feedback I've got across the board is that there's a lot more inquiries, people looking to trade up, move, and it's a very positive sign post-lockdown.
I think that's a really interesting point with people's changing requirements. Anita, what have business seen from a change and a resurgence following the COVID?
Well, being in the marketplace and dealing through all our managers and looking at what business we are achieving, certainly there's a huge change, and we are conducting deals. We've seen the business already grow. But if we look at it, what happened in January, February, as soon as the results were announced about the certainty of Brexit model, we were talking about Boris bounce, and the market had picked up so much. So what happened with COVID-19, all there was a pause. People could not do the viewings, and so it really did not affect the underlying strength of the London property. So strongly believe, and we are very confident that market is going in the right direction, and we are definitely seeing a huge comeback, and pent-up demand has been released, and people are out and people are making decisions. And they've come back. People who put the pause because of COVID-19, they are back in the market.
Yeah, definitely. I think people are definitely back in the market. There's been a big jump. Jonathan, are you seeing that in transactions as well?
We are, yes. Not surprisingly, the majority of transactions that hadn't exchanged before the lockdown, clients chose to put those on hold. The majority of those are back on and running again now. Very few fell off the table. But we are also seeing new transactions come in, largely from Hong Kong. A lot of buyers coming in from Hong Kong at the moment, but a few domestic buyers as well who have made the decision to find that property they want at a time when they consider prices certainly stagnant and not necessarily rising at the moment.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I mean, I do see that Hong Kong's gone mad. There was a show at the weekend and they sold 20 units. So I think that's definitely the big market that we're going to see people coming in. It's a question from Joyce Lim regarding mortgages, really. Arising from the COVID-19 lockdown, this is for Simon, there's a delay in loan mortgages. Why is there a delay? And then the next for Jonathan is, can the developer forfeit the deposit if you haven't got the loan and you can't complete? So Simon first.
Yeah, so the simple answer is that because of coronavirus, a number of banks had to have temporary working arrangements for their staff. So a lot of people like me have been working from home over the last 12 weeks. Now, obviously, when you dissemble the way that you work, it means that you've got to adopt new working practices. And coupled with the fact that the government has granted payment holidays for lots of borrowers, it's meant that banks have been incredibly busy doing other things in very strange circumstances when their staff aren't in the office. So yes, absolutely, things have been delayed. The other problem is the fact that valuers haven't been able to get out to value properties, which has meant that some lenders have changed their product range to basically focus on products that they know that they can get done during lockdown. And it has caused delays. Absolutely, it's caused delays. But what we have seen in the last couple of weeks is that now that valuers are able to go back again and get valuations done, things are starting to pick up and speed up. And we are starting to see products come back to more or less round where they were pre-lockdown. One of the things I will say is that there's sort of a two-tier lending platform in the UK. You've got what I call the high street lenders, and the high street lenders have stayed open. The building societies have stayed open more or less. But you've got a secondary lending market, which is really focused on professional landlords and that type of thing. And a lot of those lenders have been private equity backed, and it's been difficult for them to transact in this market. So, but what we are starting to see is that secondary market very, very slowly come back. But I mean, definitely things are getting a lot better compared to what they were.
Yeah, that's great. I hear that the same. Jonathan, are you seeing that as well?
On the question of the completion mechanism, Mark,
exactly. Are you seeing that mortgages are coming back? Are developers happy to wait a little bit, and if they're sellers, are they happy to wait a little bit? Or
we are. The valuations were unlocked about 2 weeks ago, and suddenly they're moving and catching up again now. Under the contract, technically, a buyer has to complete. There is no right to delay. There's no concept of frustration in a property purchase contract. When a buyer exchanges, he is committing to complete on that completion date, no matter what his circumstances. But the developers, all of the developers we're dealing with have been very reasonable. They're having a dialogue with the buyers. As long as the buyers are explaining their position thoroughly, that there aren't other reasons for their delay, other personal circumstances that they may be choosing to delay for other reasons outside of the lockdown, then the developers are being very reasonable and they're granting them time. Reputation in the property market is very important, and the developers do want to preserve that reputation as being reasonable.
Yeah, okay. I think that's what we're seeing, and I think most vendors, if they're in second hand, are equally waiting, because where they're trying to buy has got the same process, I think. So yeah, I haven't heard too many developers taking deposits, but I hadn't heard either. Here's a good question. So Richard Ung asked, if purchasing a London property under buy-to-let mortgage using a company, does it require directors to do a personal guarantor to be a personal guarantor? And how many properties are only worth a company to hold these assets? So how many properties should you buy if you're buying in a company, or should you do it in a personal name? I think that's kind of the question. But Simon, do you want to take the buy-to-let mortgage using a company first, and then Vida can take the other?
Yeah, so the answer is in 99.9% of cases, banks will expect a personal guarantee. There are situations where people have got complex trust structures behind a company purchase, which can make that guarantee from the beneficial owner difficult to give. And in those circumstances, the trust can give guarantees. But in nearly all cases, banks will expect a personal guarantee from the underlying borrower.
Okay, great. Vida, how many properties should you hold as a taxpayer? And in fact, I had another question just came in. Ashok Rao asked, as a higher rate taxpayer, if you aim to hold 3 or 4 buy-to-let properties, should you be doing this as a company or as an individual? So question is how many should you own as a company or you know, and that's the whole thing. Should you own as an individual or as a company?
Yes, it's an important question. I think both questions have the same answer really. And that is that essentially, the bigger your portfolio value, the more beneficial it will be to have a company structure to hold them. In terms of exactly the number of properties where that benefit comes in, it really depends on the individual's circumstances. So it's not a one answer fits all kind of scenario. What I would say is it's important at the outset to consider what your long-term goals are. So if your plan is to buy one property now, but in the future expand that portfolio into several properties, then a company structure will be better at the outset because it's difficult to transfer properties from your personal names into your company at a later stage. But if you're only going to look at a small portfolio, 1, maybe 2 properties, then personal names tends to be easier. You don't have the costs of running a company to think about and all the administration that goes along with that. Basically, what I would say is talk to us and we can help you and look at your circumstances and advise you on what the best structure is. But it's important you do consider it.
Great. I mean, there's just been another quick question coming, and I love these kind of questions. So Raymond Lum just asked, is capital gains tax still in place in the UK? I mean, unless I'm mistaken, sadly, unless something happened while I was having my builders digging, I'm really sorry about that. Then unfortunately we do still have taxes in the UK, which actually leads me on to another one, which everybody can have a go, is about stamp duty. So firstly, Vida, maybe you can ask, and one asked, what's the new 2% stamp duty everybody's talking about for foreigners? And does that apply to me if I'm British, but I'm a resident in Hong Kong?
So it's based on your residence. So as you said, and many people of you already know, that there has been an announcement that there will be an additional 2% charge for overseas residents on the purchase of UK property. And that was announced in our budget this year, earlier in March. And it applies to anything completing after April 2021, so the 1st of April 2021. If you had already exchanged contracts before the budget, but are completing after that date on April 21, then you will be exempt. And if you complete your purchase before April 2021, you also won't have to pay the charge. So the take from that is if you're going to be investing, think about buying now before it kicks in. But it's also important to consider why this charge was introduced. And we have to understand that because of the fact that properties have performed very well historically, what that's meant is that UK residents have found it difficult to buy. And in fact, is one of the reasons why the rental market is so strong. And we're just looking to add something to make things fairer all round, basically.
Brilliant. Jonathan, I've got another question which leads into that. So Nigel Chan asked, if I exchange on an off-plan property now, will I be liable for the additional 2% stamp duty?
The answer is if it completes after April 2021, then yes. Your exchange with knowledge of the new rules that have come into play or will come into play. Okay. So if you want to avoid that 2%, find a property that you know will complete or is already finished before April 2021.
I mean, and I think I'd add to that 100% you have to pay it, but it is only 2%. It's not like some cities in Asia where it's 15% or 20%. It's 2%. And if I'm talking, as I said earlier, 10-year models, they double every property prices on average, double every 10 years, then 2% does get lost. But yeah, if you're desperate to save it, then it's a good time to do. There's another good question here, which actually I think is quite interesting for everybody. So TC Gann asks, are there any chances of stamp duty relief? And Philip Benison asks, similar, is now the right time to boost transaction volumes and tax revenues by cutting SDLT? Rob, do you want to take that?
Well, I must say I would defer probably to a couple of other people on the panel when it comes to stamp duty, but I would say that clearly and this is more of an economic point, but we have spent a tremendous amount of money, haven't we, on the furlough scheme, and there are only a few ways that you can either pay that back over a long period of time, and one of those is obviously increasing taxes. Now, I did read a really interesting article which talked about the fact that actually you could increase taxes just on high net worth individuals, but actually that doesn't really get the job done in terms of if you need to raise tax revenue, you actually unfortunately need to tax the whole of the UK population, which I think is pretty politically unpalatable. So I think that is one thing. I think the second thing is we know that when government intervenes with things like stamp duty, actually acts as it's a big deal when it comes to investing in property. We saw when the tax changes were introduced a few years ago, how buy-to-let spiked and then came back down. So I think government really need to think very carefully about what they do. And if they want to spur the property market, there's an obvious way to do it, make it easier to purchase property.
Great. Vida, do you have a view on that? Are they likely to? Should they? Are they likely to?
Interestingly, there was an article in the news just today where this particular question was posed to an MP, and his response wasn't that it would happen in terms of we would get a stamp duty holiday, but he also didn't rule it out. So that's being passed around as a possible hint that maybe it's being considered. And of course, one way to boost the economy would be to get the housing market back in action, and by putting some kind of stamp duty relief or holiday, it could really help in getting that done.
I think that's really interesting. If everybody doesn't know this stat, 1 in 8 people in the UK work in something related to the property industry. So I agree. The property industry is the driver, a key driver for the UK economy, and we need to get it going. Whether the government do that, my personal view is they won't touch it at all because, as Rob said, they're desperate for money. But I hope they're going to do something on for first-time buyers. Maybe they will let that in. Simon, does that affect mortgages if they get a stamp duty holiday? Does that affect it if the government waives stamp duty? Or what about if the developer agree to cover the stamp duty? Does that affect the loan?
It's a very good question, Mark, because if a developer offers stamp duty within the world that I operate in, that's deemed to be an incentive, and incentive has used as a obviously as an incentive, and so that incentive can be deducted from the purchase price to calculate how much somebody can borrow. So effectively, any incentives do have to be disclosed. So we've seen in the past developers offer stamp duty, furniture packs, all different sorts of incentives, and these need to be disclosed at the time of application for a mortgage. And the value attached to those incentives then is deducted to work out how much somebody can borrow.
Okay, that's great. That's great. This is an interesting question on which I think is quite useful about working from home. Mr. Yip asked, with COVID-19 and people working from home, which a lot of people are now, and Jonathan and Simon mentioned earlier, don't you think people will prefer the suburbs over the city centre? Anita?
Well, some people may be able to work from home going forward, looking in the future, but some people may not be. It depends on the jobs they are in. So while the commuting is becoming easier and the values of properties outside central London would be cheaper, so yes, that could be option for some. But London is an amazing city, and I really don't think the prices are going to change so much in central London and surroundings. And as I said, some people would want to work from the office. Some people would not be able to do their jobs, not being in the office.
I agree. I think a lot of, living in London is not all about just the commute. It's about the ambience, the restaurants, the theatres, the whole life of living in London. And if you want to give that up, I love Rob's quote at the beginning. Rob, what's your take on that? Do you think, are you seeing a shift in everybody now not buying in London or not looking in London? They're all going out?
No, we're not really seeing that. We are seeing more people look for, I think one of the highest keywords that people were looking for was garden. And that was certainly happening in the lockdown. So you can imagine that. And personally, with a 3-year-old son, I've only got a balcony in London. So I would have loved to shove him out in the garden sometimes. But I do think, I would also say on a personal note, my brother and sister live in the suburbs and they have lovely houses, but I wouldn't want to live where they live because it's definitely a lot more boring than London. So I think you're right. I think the ambience is a thing. I think I was talking to a few of my friends who work in the commercial property market, and they're obviously trying to figure out what it's going to mean for commercial property. And they have sort of mixed views. They think that, long term, people will want offices in London and it will come back. They think there may be some sort of smaller offices, sort of flexible type office space in some of the suburbs, which enable people sometimes to work from there and sometimes to come to London. So I think you'll probably see a bit of a mixture of people doing things. But I don't know about any of you on the conference call. I find that working from home works some of the time. It probably is good to keep things going, but to do new things, to try and sort of build new products or do anything new, you really want your team around you because it's just too hard over this type of stuff. But that's just a personal opinion.
I agree. Simon, do you have a view on that? Or do you think everybody, it's not going to make a difference, is it, to the mortgage market, people working from home? That doesn't affect getting loans or anything like that, does it?
No, it has no impact on the mortgage market whatsoever. But I think that when you look and see how people live, as people's lives change, then different lifestyle changes. And, if to take me back 35 years ago, had I been looking for work in London at the time, I would have wanted to live very close to the office and enjoyed what was going on in around those areas. If you look at the different parts of London where global companies decided to take up space, if you use King's Cross as an example, you've got some of the world's largest IT businesses there having their European headquarters. And there's lots of new developments coming up around that area, and that area has bloomed as a result. And if I was working for one of those IT businesses with everything around, as a young person, I'd like to be and around that environment rather than living out in the suburbs. So I think it's a lifestyle choice everybody makes, and as their lives change, they will change their lifestyle.
100%. It doesn't affect from a legal perspective, does it? Working from home, it doesn't really affect it from when you buy it, does it, Jonathan?
No, not at all, Mark. And I'd echo what Simon says. A lot of it has to do with the age. There's different generations, obviously, across London. Young people make friendships at offices. Young people like to be out and about in London. I like to be out and about in London, still being young. It's a great place to be.
It's the best during the virus. It was easy. The streets were empty. It was great. This is a good question. Actually, this is interesting. It's not. This is the opposite. So James Tan asks, will a studio still be the most popular investment for buy-to-let? Anita, that's definitely your question.
Well, talking about studio being the most popular, I'm not sure of that. So it really depends on an individual investor. Are they looking for highest yield with the low quantum investment at the first place? So whenever we look at new developments or properties in the market for sale, your studios will be obviously at the lowest value and they will get a higher yield. So if people are looking to invest least amount of money and get a higher yield, then studio is a good option. But I would say that when you come to resell it would be better to have at least a 1-bedroom flat, because then you're opening on to different audience, you're opening on to owner occupiers rather than just investment only. So studio is a good option for some and not for some.
Great, yeah, I agree. I love studios because they're the highest yield, as you say, but the capital may be different. Is there a difficulty from a loans perspective, Simon, on studios? Because I've heard a few things. I've had a couple of people ask, you know, how big does it have to be to get a loan on it? Isn't there something to do with the size of properties on loans?
Yeah, there is. Yeah, yes. Effectively, the magic figure is square meters, and if a studio is 30 square meters or more, then most of the lenders are very happy lending on studios. What we have started to see is the emergence of micro studios, where they're a lot smaller than 30 square meters, and they can be difficult to finance because lenders are worried about potential resale values if they had to repossess. But studios are no problem financing. You know, we have a lot of clients who buy studios both to live in and to invest in, and you know, we are able to get them financed.
Obviously, from a tax perspective, you know, it's slightly better because the income's lower, isn't it?
Well, obviously, your tax is going to be proportionate to the amount of income you earn. So actually, it doesn't make any difference as such from a tax perspective. It's more about your yield and what you can achieve on it.
Property studios very popular for inquiries on Rightmove.
Yeah, they can be. It's all location really. You know, if you're going to rent a studio, you're as a tenant, you're interested in price, but you're mostly interested in location because you're not going to be spending much time in there, are you? You're going to be spending most of your time out and about, going to work and in the restaurants and shops.
100%. I mean, location seems the same. Henry Young asked, is resale property good for investment? Anita? Resale property. So I think we need to define that, whether that means a second-hand sale or an assignment. Maybe you could talk about both, because I'm not quite sure what he meant.
I presume he meant resale, mean completed properties, mean second-hand sales. So yes, a resale property could be a good option, providing it ticks a lot of boxes. You know, what we have seen over the last many years, the tenants are looking for lifestyle. They're looking for all the amenities within the developments. So providing when we are looking for a resale property and we do our homework well, which is the most important thing, location, the size of the property, the outlook of the property, the condition of the property, and is it a fourth floor walk-up or is it a lower ground floor flat? So there are a lot of things to look for when you're buying a resale property, and your choice is limited. Because if you look at it, there may be one flat in one mansion block available or a different flat in the Victorian houses. But when you go for a development, you have choices. So the chances of going wrong or chances of losing the property you first wanted to buy are going to be slim because you buy there and then. So I do believe that resale could be an option. You need to give it time. You need to have your mortgage in place. You need to have your cash in place. You need to do your homework, and you need to look at various options and spend that time. But if you talk about the assignment, that could be a very good option, but that's again very limited. It will be only people who have bought, like, say, for example, more flats than they can complete on, and you can pick up a good deal, but that could be quite good as well. So while when you're buying a new build, you are actually buying with a 10% deposit, and the balance on most of the development will be either paid a year later or on completion. So you're fixing your price, and you do have options. Which floor you want to buy, what size do you want to buy. So it depends on every investor, really. Great. And if you want to have if you have money sitting in the bank, which is obviously doing nothing, and you want to have the rental income straight away, because we all talk about and we all experience how busy the rental market is, then for sure, you go for something which is readily available, which is a second-hand property resale. Thank you.
That's great. Thanks, Anita. Simon, does it affect finances? I take second-hand and then do assignment, because I think assignment's a really big topic on people buying, whether they can get finance.
Yeah, so just on a second-hand property, if people are buying a resale, there's no problem at all. Sorry, resale, I mean second-hand purchase. With assignment, it is slightly different. So just to qualify perhaps what people think an assignment is, it's where somebody's exchanged on a property and before completion are looking to sell that contract on to another purchaser. Now, that particular market isn't very well supported. There are lenders that will lend on them, but it's a very, very, very specialist market. So my advice is always for people to get good advice on finance, but it's even more important when you're thinking of investing or buying an assigned contract, because there are only a small number of lenders willing to lend on them.
So just to be clear, an assigned contract means I've already bought the flat. I now want to sell it for a profit before I actually complete the money. So I've only paid 10% and I want to sell it to somebody else and then get my money back and get a profit. And you're saying that is
Correct.
slightly more difficult and you need a specialist lender.
Absolutely correct.
Okay, fantastic. That's great. This is a very quick question, which is interesting. Justin Chen asked, if I buy a parking space with a new flat, will I have to pay stamp duty on the parking space? Which maybe Jonathan could ask. And then I would then ask Simon to ask if I buy a parking space as part of the contract, can I get finance on the parking space as part of the contract? Or can I get, if I buy it later, can I get finance on the parking space? If you see what I mean. But Jonathan, do you want to take if I have to pay stamp on it?
Yes, well, the parking space will be a linked transaction to the purchase of the apartment. So stamp duty will be payable on the parking space. If the buyer's liable for the 3% surcharge because it's a separate property, then the 3% wouldn't be applicable to the parking space if the parking space is under a separate lease, because the 3% surcharge only applies to dwellings. So if you're buying a property with an apartment and a separate parking lease, it's important to ascribe a value to that parking lease so you don't pay the extra 3% on the parking price. However,
does that not affect the finance though? I mean, Simon can answer that. Sorry, John.
Well, I just carry on, Mark. Just one other clarification there, because a lot of the time the parking space is wrapped up in the lease itself. It's simply a right to use parking. In that situation, you can't sever the value from the apartment, and stamp duty is payable on the whole price, including the 3% surcharge. So it's important to find out at the beginning of a transaction if you're getting a separate parking lease or if it's wrapped up in the actual lease of the apartment as a right.
That's great. Simon, on the parking, do you get finance on it? And if it's a separate lease, do you get finance on it or?
No, so let's just pick up the question. I think this relates to what Jonathan was just saying, in that when we see parking spaces as part of a purchase for an apartment, that it tends to form part of the one contract, and that will then get valued by the valuer. And as long as the valuer assesses the value for that contract, that purchase, and includes the parking space, and they can see the uplift in value, then obviously you'll get a mortgage that's commensurate with the value of the flat with the parking space. If you buy a parking space subsequently, then if you can then get that parking space as part of your lease, you can then refinance your flat to release money to buy the parking space. If you're just going to buy a lease for a car park or a parking space, then it's going to be very difficult to get finance. You need to pay cash for it. I hope I've explained.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. That's perfect. I get that. Rob, is there big demand for parking in London now? Are you seeing huge spike or drop since everybody's now working from home? It's interesting.
I haven't actually looked, to be honest with you, but I certainly haven't been told that we've had a big decrease in that, to be honest with you. But yeah, no, I don't think we've seen a big decrease. Great,
Anita, it's your question at the end. Should I actually buy a parking space? That's really the question here. Should I waste the money on a parking space? You know, Benham's did research last year. We do a lot. If you want to follow us on our website, we do a lot. We did on parking last year. And there was a right to park sold in Knightsbridge for £500,000 last year. And if you bought it separately and you can't get finance on it, my God, you've got to have an expensive car. But so should you buy one, Anita, or is it just a waste of money? Now we all like walking and cycling.
Mark, you very well know my view on that, because parking is essential. It is an investment. And I find when agents are trying to sell property, they want the investor to be able to buy it, and they don't necessarily focus the importance of parking space. You know, developers actually have less spaces available than the number of apartments. So when we are investors, if we are not buying a 2-bedroom, 2 bathrooms, or even 2-bedroom, 2 bathrooms of a certain size, we are not even eligible for a parking space. So I would really mention that the importance of parking space, because when you're buying it purely investment, and overseas investor is buying, he's going to be renting it for a couple of years, 3 years, whatever, and his potential tenant may not need that because they may not buy the car, they may not need it. But when they come to resale, always remember the resale market is strongest in UK. Investors markets, when the developers start to sell, is more busy overseas. So when you're selling it to local buyers, they would need it. So I really believe it's not a waste of money. If you can get it, you should definitely get it. In fact, we are on the waiting list for some of the smaller units because it's not easy to get.
It's really hard to get parking, and you can't park anywhere in new developments at all. So if you don't buy one, you can't park. No residence parking, nowhere. So you can have to leave it at Heathrow Airport, and there's no other way of parking. So let's go on to another question. Oh, I'll do that one in a second. So this is a question from one of our existing clients who's obviously slipped in and put in a nice, easy question for us. It's for Vida, actually, and I'm glad he's here, not just as our tax consultant, but as our finance director. So he's smiling now because he's slightly nervous what I'm going to ask. But the question is how has Corona impacted tenant payment rates? Has there been increased levels of delayed payments or non-payments?
Yeah, so obviously that's a very topical question, and I can understand why it's being asked. I wasn't planning on discussing this today as we're focusing on tax, but you know, I do have the experience to be able to answer it. And naturally, we're seeing some tenants having difficulties making payments. We've also had intervention from the government, which isn't crystal clear. Essentially, what the government have said is that landlords and tenants need to work with each other to come to reasonable arrangements, taking into account specific circumstances. On top of that, they've introduced what's termed as the eviction ban, which basically means that there's been an extension in the notice period that a landlord has to give if a tenant isn't paying their rent. So that's increased from 2 weeks to 3 months, essentially banning evictions.
It jumped from 2 months to 3 months, not 2 weeks.
No, on a Section 8 for non-payment of rent.
Oh, you had to wait 2 months, 3 months to submit.
Yes, on a Section 21, it has increased from 2 months to 3 months. The important thing is as agents, what we're doing is we are, you know, taking a proactive way of dealing with this and discussing, communicating with all the parties involved to try and come up with something that's fair and reasonable. And we're finding that where we're taking such action, landlords are being understanding, tenants are being reasonable, and so we are making payment proposals where necessary so that we can just ride out this this difficult time. And so default rates are actually very low. I think we did some analysis, and less than 1% of our tenants are actually in a situation of default, because we've come up with a solution that works for everyone. The key is to just make sure we're keeping those lines of communication open and we're being fair. And if we do that, it's not really a big problem.
I agree. I mean, I think, you know, we're very careful in referencing our tenants, and we have quite a lot of high-level tenants. But, you know, few people have commented and said it's great for these good intentions of government, but they're not paying for it. But at the end of the day, we're in unprecedented times, and everybody has to just be empathetic with tenants and be careful. And we're doing that. But we're working with tenants. I mean, we're being very careful, and we haven't had so many issues, as Vida said. So here's a good question. I think this is for most people. So Alex Tan asked, sell, let, or hold? Anita?
Well, my opinion always is not to sell unless you have to, because over the years, we've seen how the soft costs have increased. Your stamp duty is higher, your legal fees, your finance costs. So why fix it if it's not broken? So you would only sell if you have reasons to sell. But if, on the other hand, if you want to rent, well, we all know how strong the rental market is. So if you bring your property in pristine condition, which our sister company InStyle is constantly doing that, we report that 98% of properties which are furnished by InStyle get rented within 2 weeks. So the idea is to get the optimum rental value of your investment and not waste your money on buying and selling because you are giving it to Her Majesty. So yes, rent it and get the optimum rental value by attracting a right tenant who is going to look after your property, who's going to pay the rent in time, and choose an agent who will do the due diligence for that.
Okay, good. So you're saying hold and let. Simon, what are you saying? Should we sell now and buy something else, or should we hold, or what should we do?
No, I'm very much to hold in this particular market. I think it's important to just take stock and look to the future, because things are, whenever things are uncertain, it's never a good time to make a decision. I think that the time when things are uncertain is just the time to review what you've got and to just try and preserve and lock down what you have. Now, if that means looking at your finance arrangements to see if you can save money on your mortgage or any other aspects of what you're doing, then now's the time to be really sort of looking at that side of things. But I wouldn't suggest selling in this market. I think that the market in the long term has got a lot of good fundamentals behind it, and I'm a big believer in holding for the long term. Perfect.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, Rob, do you have a quick view on that? Are loads of people flooding trying to exit the market, or are we not seeing that?
No, they're not. But I would just make a point. I do think that sometimes when there is tremendous amounts of uncertainty, it can be a time for opportunistically buying, depending on your circumstances. So it may be a time to sort of hold and invest. Just a quick analogy. So in the American market, which is obviously very different to the UK, there were some very large corporate landlords that were put together. One backed by Blackstone called Invitation Homes, that actually bought up a tremendous amount of property during and after the financial crisis, sort of 2010, 2011. Now they've got 80,000 properties because they bought in the right place at the right time. Now, I don't think we're in the same place at all, but I do think it's an interesting time when there's uncertainty. There's often, if you're a cash buyer, there's opportunity. And if you can sort of, talking to people like Mark and Anita, who probably know of deals that are coming up, and there will be people who have to exit the market for other reasons, so there may be deals to be done. So actually I would probably be a little bit more bullish and see if you've got cash to invest, that it would be a time to look at other properties.
100%. I think it's a great time. Jonathan, have you had feeling on that? Lots of your clients saying, I've got to get out of the market, or they want to get into the market, or they want to stay in the market?
A lot of clients are waiting to see what happens at the moment. Personally, if I were investing into London, I'd always be looking at a 10-year plan, looking at a long-term plan, not a quick buck. As you touched on earlier, Mark, if you look at London property prices over a 10-year period, there's ups and downs along the way, but the overall trend over a long period is upward prices. So I think just do your research, look at what's on the market, look if it's a good deal on a price per square foot basis, know your location, and then look at that 10-year plan.
That's great. That's great. Actually, here's another quick question. It's for you again, Jonathan, because it's about signing. It's Esther Lee asked, I heard Land Registry has relaxed its signing requirements. Can I sign completion documents electronically? I mean, I think that's a question I've seen a couple of times is, do I have to come to London to do everything, or is it possible for me to do it at home wherever I am?
Yeah, that's a good question, Mark. And at Quostels, we now use DocuSign. So whatever documents we can sign electronically, we are arranging for them to be signed electronically, so that clients don't even need to print them out. There's two exceptions, though. That is the mortgage documents and the actual completion transfer document that conveys title. Now, the Land Registry have allowed lawyers to complete those, to actually effect completion electronically, but that doesn't mean that the documents can be signed electronically. The mortgage document and the actual completion document still needs to be signed in wet ink with a witness, and the witness still has to view that person signing the signature in person, not over a video call. So some people have been viewing people signing during lockdown through windows. Others I've heard have left their deed on a windscreen wiper on a car for someone to then sign, so they don't have to touch the paper. All sorts of creative ways of actually signing with a witness. We can then complete if we have those documents emailed back to us, but the actual physical execution where it needs to be a deed does have to still be a wet ink signature, and the Land Registry haven't changed their position on that, unfortunately. There may well be pressure for things to change, but it will need a government review, and I expect another couple of years before we do see the greater take up
Simon,
of electronic.
That's great, Jonathan. Thank you, Simon. You don't need to come to do your mortgage or anything, do you?
Sorry, Mark, say that
You don't have
question
to
again.
come to the UK to do your mortgage, do you? Or get a
No,
loan.
no.
You can do it anywhere you
Not
want.
at all. No. We deal with clients all over the world online, and our system's very sophisticated. We're able to access people's financial data securely, and any forms that we need signed, we can email for signatures. The thing that we do need people to get done locally is certification of ID and address, which is obviously part and parcel of any mortgage application. So that's the only part of things that we do need people to go and see either a local solicitor or notary to get notarized.
Okay, which is interesting actually. I've had a couple of other quite interesting mortgage points. In fact, this is quite interesting from Chris Doughty. Question on payment holidays. We've been told that landlords taking payment holidays won't affect future lending, but we're already seeing questions from lenders being asked about, have you taken a payment holiday? Looks as though this will affect your personal lending ability going forward. Is that right?
It shouldn't do. The whole point of the payment holidays introduced by the government was to give people space if they needed it. I think that the needed is a very, very important point to make, because I think when the government first announced the payment holidays, there are genuine people who do need to take the payment holidays. And I think there's other people who have perhaps, for want of a better phrase, perhaps tried it out to see if they can get it when they don't really need it. I think the important thing for people to realise is that if they do take a payment holiday, it doesn't mean that they don't have to pay that money back, that the money is added to the mortgage, interest will be charged on it. But the government have made it very clear that anybody who does take a payment holiday, it should not impact on their credit going forward.
That's interesting. And the same actually with rentals as well. We're seeing tenants coming and asking, saying, oh, I've lost my job, or I've got problems. I mean, in fact, they haven't necessarily said they lost their job. Vida sees this a lot. And we actually ask people to fill in a form, a hardship form, and prove they've done it. And actually, you do find a number of people say, oh, I'm just going to pay it. Because if it's only a deferment, you've got to pay it down the road. So, but sometimes it is a crucial thing, and then we look at that. Another question on a loan is, what's the maximum age for a borrower? Martin Ting asked that. So maybe that Simon could take the maximum age for a borrower. Does that affect from a legal perspective? But maybe Simon could do that first.
Well, if I just deal with the maximum age, it all depends on where somebody's living, to be honest. If you're looking at international borrowers, we can get mortgages for people up to the age of 75. If you're looking at domestic borrowers, then lenders can lend well into people's retirements. You know, there are some lenders that will lend sort of 50-year mortgages to people at the age of sort of 75, 80. It really comes down to where people are living when they apply. What we tend to see for most international-based clients is that the maximum age is 75.
Okay, that's great. And that's for buy-to-let or home owner-occupier?
That's for both.
Okay, brilliant. Jonathan, does it affect it from someone, if someone's 110, are they still allowed to sign a lease? Or if they're 5, is that okay?
Our job is, well, you've got to be over 18, Mark, but
okay.
our job as a solicitor is to make sure that they fully understand what they're signing.
Okay.
So we just have to be very careful if to make sure that the client understands what they're entering into.
Oh, that's interesting. That is interesting. I think it's very ageist, isn't it? You know, loans are only up to 75. We're all living longer. I wonder whether we're going to end up the Japanese system where you can grandfather loans. Here's a tax question for Vida. Lim Yat asked, what expenses are allowable? I've just furnished my apartment. Can I claim this expenses? I'm assuming it's a new build and she's just spent money on furniture. Can she claim that back? And if so, how does she do it?
Yes, so the way to understand essentially what can be deducted when calculating your income tax is essentially anything that is involved in the day-to-day running of the property business. So that could be things like your repairs, your insurance, your service charge, your ground rent, accountancy fees for preparing tax returns, anything to do with the running of the property. It also will include interest, but due to recent changes, the amount that can be claimed in interest is restricted to the basic rate of tax. In terms of furnishings, the initial furnishing of the property is actually considered as a capital expense and can't be deducted from the rental income. But any future replacement of the furniture can be deducted. So I think that addresses that question.
No, that's great. That's great, actually. I think it's interesting that what you can and can't do, because obviously fair wear and tear got knocked off, which was another one. I think I'll ask another tax question only because there were a few together. Judy Lee asked, this is my first tax return. When does it need to be submitted to HMRC, and can I submit it online?
Yes, that's an interesting question. Our tax year runs to the 5th of April, and the tax return can either be submitted online or by paper. If it's being submitted online, then the deadline is the 31st of January the following year. But non-residents can't submit online unless they're using commercial software or are using the services of an agent. You also need a unique tax reference number before you can submit online if you want to do it yourself. If you can't submit online, then you need to submit a paper return, and the deadline for paper returns is the 31st of October in the tax year. Okay,
that's great. So this is quite good. A number of people, and probably because I mentioned Brexit earlier, have asked about Brexit. So Usman asked, and this is a good one for Rob maybe, in addition to COVID uncertainty, if the UK hits hard Brexit, what will be the outlook of London property in the rental market? Zone 1 and 2 properties said, but I think generally, what's the outlook for the market, for sales and the rental market?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because we talked, it was incessant Brexit talk for 2 or 3 years, wasn't it? And now it's incessant COVID talk. I think that actually the most important thing again is to focus on what you're trying to buy. I think the only thing that would affect property prices in the round really is if lots of big businesses started leaving. So if the big businesses in the city started leaving and all the rest of it based on Brexit negotiations. So far, I don't think we've seen that in such great numbers. There was a lot of sort of kerfuffle when the whole Brexit thing in 2016 started happening. But actually, I think you've seen that we've got a really solid worker base in the UK. You have some really highly skilled workers that work in the City of London. So I think that yes, there is a possibility, and that's potentially a risk. But I suppose you're always taking some level of risk when you're investing in the property market, and I think it's a relatively low one, would be my view.
You're mute, Mark. You're on mute.
Sorry, I'm muted. It's 11:15. I'm conscious that time is ticking on. I mean, to be fair, most people are still with us. So what we'll do is we'll take a few extra final questions, and then we'll finish up. And as I said, we have had an enormous number of questions today, and there's no way I could even read them all, let alone answer them all. But we will get back to every single person. I think the issue on Brexit is quite interesting, whether we have a hard Brexit or not. And I think a lot of people have asked about that. This is one question's quite interesting. And I don't know, maybe everybody's got a view on this. Nicole Koo asked, with COVID, how would impact future students' enrollment and hence London properties? Rob, do you want to take that first?
Sorry, can you say that again, Mark?
It says with COVID, how is it going to impact future students' enrollment, i.e. students coming from overseas signing up, and is that going to affect the London property market?
Yeah, so I'll give an example quite close to home, actually. So my brother-in-law, who's a fantastic chap, he married my sister, well done him. He is a teacher at a quite prestigious London university, which has, and predominantly he teaches American students and Far East students who come in to do his business courses. And what he's seen that the summer courses are actually probably being pushed, but actually he's had strong demand for his courses in what they call the fall, so autumn and in the winter and beyond, actually. So I think what's happened here is that probably the summer courses where they would sort of troop around London, and we'd see them if you live in London, probably aren't happening quite so much, but there's still strong demand to come and study in the UK from abroad. Hopefully when all this settles down from September onwards. Obviously, it's dependent a little bit on sort of the airlines and all the rest of it, but they're really planning for that, and they believe that they have a full course schedule and actually almost 90% enrollment actually for those courses. So I think the only real question is if we do have a second wave, whether all those get cancelled. Now the hope is the R rate doesn't get too high and that people are able to travel. So my hope is that I think the Open University has proved that you can do university degrees online, but I still think people want a student experience, and especially if they're studying in London, there are all the amenities and all the theatre that we talked about earlier. So I think there's still going to be strong demand, but I think we need to wait and see what happens with travel, really.
Great. Anita, do you have a view on students? Is it going to affect the market with no students? Are there no students now? That's more the question.
Well, we did see a lot of students leaving as soon as the lockdown was announced. And what we are now seeing is that demand from all our offices, people looking to rent properties from August, September. So it kind of indicates that people are looking to come back. We obviously don't have clear guidance from the government yet, but looking at the rental potential demand from all of our offices looking to rent from August, September, it kind of shows the confidence in people wanting to come back. We do know that the students is a big market in London, especially now China announcing that, America announcing that no Chinese students they will be taking. So where are they going to go? They're all going to come to London. And we have a very strong demand over here. And if we look at the schools, I mean, they're starting to go back, and obviously they're working a plan how people can go back to the colleges or the schools. So I agree with Rob. If there's no second wave, then definitely we'll see people coming back.
Yeah, I think that's the case. There's no problem, Simon, from a mortgage or a loan perspective if you say you're going to let to students, is there? Because people think it's going to be, students wrecking the flat. I mean, we see the absolute opposite, but I'm not sure that lenders do. We have we have probably 20% probably just under that of our tenants are students, and they're fantastic students. They come from overseas. They come from if they're spending £50,000 a year on their education here, plus some of them spend, we have one Chinese student at the moment spending just under £2,000 a week on rent at the moment. And these students are not the type that are going to have wild parties and trash flats. And so it's problem. But I wonder whether you lenders as a whole have issue with students.
No, not at all. It's more to do with the actual tenancy agreements itself. As long as the property is let under a short sharehold tenancy, lenders are perfectly happy, because obviously that then gives them rights to step in for any reason if the mortgage wasn't paid. But there's no problem with students at all. No,
great. Here's we are going to do a couple more. Mo Bisisso, that's a good name. What a lovely name. Mo Bisisso asked, which pockets of London do you see the best value for investors today? Anita, you may as well take that because that's your topic.
Well, you know that we're constantly doing research on where to invest, what to expect. We'd like to do our research and looking at where are the pockets where we feel that investors or stroke ourselves can do well. So at the moment, looking at value for money and looking at the regeneration areas, I am inclined to look at from zone 2 to zone 4. You have certain things to look for, like your Crossrail, or you're investing with the right developer who has a track record, and you're entering in the market at the beginning. So you kind of grow your portfolio, your property investment with the developer. We have been investing in the past. We have several examples where we have seen our properties grow along with our clients, where they invest with the right developer in the beginning of the phase and look at the other options there are. Either it's a Crossrail, or who is the developer, how big is the development, how long is going to be for, and of course the commuting. We always tell our potential investors your distance to the station. And if you're a family, it could be near the parks. If you are a student, it should be the direct link to the universities. So there are lots of things to consider. And I believe if we can achieve rental yields of 4 to 5%, where we do see there are a lot of developments. If you're going to zone 4, you can get the rental yields of 4 to 5%. And you look at your bank interest, I mean, it is non-existent. And I'm sure Simon would would confirm that you could borrow the money at maybe 3.5%. So if you can if you could borrow the money between 3 to 3.5%.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
If we look at borrowing your money at 3.5%, and you're looking at the rental yields about close to 5%, and not even looking at the capital appreciation. So those areas where there is a capital appreciation, regeneration areas, big developers, if the developers are investing billions of pounds and going out of central London, you look at Southall, for example, where we all invested recently. Why? Because we know there's a castle, because we know it's close to the airport, it's a Barclay scheme, you're entering in the beginning of the scheme, you know well. So they'll have a bit of capital appreciation, albeit 3, 4, 5%, who knows, but you also have the rental yield, and more people can afford it. You don't have to rely on expats. There are local people, as you know, PwC are saying that by 2025, 60% of Londoners will be renting. So we have a huge demand for rentals, and we see it from our own experience. So I would recommend people to do the homework well, to hold someone's hand who's professional at it. Invest in your agent. I mean, investing in your agent is time. Who is an investor themselves, who can guide them, who can be unbiased, and then make an informative decision.
Great. Rob, do you have a view?
Sorry, Mark, you cracked up there. Sorry.
Rob, what's your view on where's demand?
Where's demand for tenants?
No, where demand? Which pockets do we see the most growth for investors today?
So in London, I think we talked about this last time. I think the East has been a really strong area of growth over a period. I think prime, again, it really depends on what properties you're buying. We've seen some really interesting Camden, where I live, just so I look at it quite regularly. Over the last 6 months, it's seen some really strong growth actually in rental yields, which I've been quite surprised at. But I think it's mainly because of the strong demand, and therefore, that classic thing about if there's a lot of demand for the property, then if Mark and Anita, for example, are renting it out for you, then they can get a really good price. So I think that the sort of East that has sort of, I don't think it's come and gone, but that sort of initial groundswell over the last few years may have sort of softened a little bit. But there are certainly areas, I always think it's about picking the right development. I think if you talk about areas, it's quite difficult. But I think if you pick this development, that development, and actually a development that's sort of almost 2,000 meters down the road can actually make a huge difference, because if it's closer to a tube station, then it's far more attractive. So I suppose it's a harder question for me to answer. But if people really want those kind of stats, actually, I can send out a bit of a pack actually that they can have a look at.
Very helpful. Simon, are there any loaning on different zones, or do they loan on all zones?
No, you can get the zones don't cause an issue at all. You can get mortgages on any zones in London, or actually any towns or cities in the UK.
Great. I think we are getting close to the end now. Freddie, sorry, were you going to ask something?
I was just saying, for some of our overseas investors, the zones can make a difference when looking at overseas banks. But following from what Simon said, for UK lenders, it's not an issue.
No, but equally, there are overseas lenders that will lend in zones 1, 2, 3, and 4.
Absolutely,
So, yeah.
That's great. So I think we are going to wrap up. It's almost 11:30, and before we go, I think it's really interesting. So I've got 2 little questions. The first one is, in a short sentence, what's your top tip for investment today to give everybody that's listened? And the second one, how much would each of you bet the house prices are higher this time next year? So that's the question. Would you bet they're going to be up? And how much would you bet they're low? I'm happy to have a bet with anybody if they say they're going to be down, but I'm not happy to have a bet if they say they're going to be up, because I think they're going to be up. Go on then, let's start. Go on, Simon, you go first. So what's your top tip in a quick sentence, and how much would you bet they're going to be up on this time next year?
So top tip is to make sure you do your research and choose what and where you buy based on that research and really get some advice. I think that's the most important thing. And I'm not a gambling man, but I mean, I'll put £100 down. How about that, Mark?
Jonathan?
Sorry, Mark, just run
top tip and then
top
the bet.
tip.
I know you're a lawyer, you never like betting, but you know.
Yeah, well, top tip, do your research, decide on your location and thoroughly look at that. Know the location where you're going to buy. And from a legal point of view, something we always come up is service charge. Have a very close look at the service charge, because that will really eat into your yield if you've got any void periods. 1 month unlet, if you've got a high service charge, that can damage the yield very much.
Yeah, it can do.
Sorry, the bet. Not a betting man. If you said November next year, Mark, I'd put a lot of money on it.
Really? Okay, fair enough. How much is a lot of money? £10
for me.
Vida, what's your view? Top tip?
Top tip, I think when you're investing, think about your long-term goals and objectives to plan ahead, and that will direct you in terms of what to buy and how to structure it. In terms of where I think the market's going to be next year, I'll be a little bit cheeky. I'll say on average, I reckon we're going to be 3 to 4% up, but if you invest with us, it'll be more.
Yeah, and how much are you putting on that? Come on. It's going to a charity. This is being recorded.
I'll put my Rolex watch.
Okay, good. Anita?
Whoa.
What's your top investment tip?
My top investment tip is do your homework, like Jonathan has said, Simon has said, and also buy for long term. You really need to be in the property game for minimum 5 years, on average 10 years. Yes. And do your homework well and hold some professional's hand who will be totally unbiased.
Great. And your bet, up or down?
My bet is I'll double up on everybody what they're betting.
Double up? Bloody wow.
Whatever everybody's collective figure is, I'll double up.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Rob. What's your top tip on investment for next year?
I'm looking forward to taking Anita's money now. So I suppose I've got two. So the first thing is think about who you're going to rent it to. I think it's quite important to have a kind of a clear picture of, this is a student flat. This is for young professionals. This is for a family. I think that really helps. I think the other one would be just, I think we talked about on the last webinar, I was really impressed with if you furnish the flat, then, or at least stage it, people can really imagine what it's going to be like to live in it. And I think that really helps you to drive a good rental price and therefore a good rental yield. And my sort of forecast, I think it'd be slightly up. I'm probably not as bullish as Anita, but I think it'd be slightly up, yeah.
So Rob kindly stole both of my tips. So my tip was to make sure who your tenants are and make sure you've been given the right rental. And I was also going to add that dressing it correctly is the most important thing. Even if you're buying new build, and even though we're saying there's lots of people looking to rent, it has to look amazing to rent. If it's beautifully presented and it's furnished well, then it will let quicker and often for more money. And I get that. We see that again and again and again and again. And so that's my tip. And I'm willing to bet £1,000 that this time next year, we'll see prices higher than they are now. So, well, that's it. Thank you so much. And I'm surprised everybody's almost stayed to the end. And we've done an hour and a half, which is way over. So I apologize if we've made you miss your next Zoom meeting, but I'm sure you can have a half-hour cup of tea before you go to the next one. And I'd just like to say thank you very much from myself, Mark von Grundher, and thank you very much to everybody else for joining us today. Oh, I know about 50 people have asked, can they please have a recording? Absolutely, we will send a recording of this out. If you have any questions, email webinar@benhams.com. That's webinar@benhams.com. If you email that, it comes through to me, and we will share that with the panel. We have all your questions, so we'll be distributing those as well. But as I said, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm sorry I had a bit of drilling going on, but this is London after all. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
How do you leave?